Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a place where ancient spirits linger, where forgotten rituals breathe beneath the roots of old temples, and where every story is a thread pulled from the dark corners of belief. Here, myths are not just tales, they're warnings. Tonight, we take you into the heart of northern Thailand, into a forest no one speaks of, into the ruins of a temple long abandoned, not because time wore it down, but because something inside it refused to die. A mother, a loss, a ritual never meant to be touched again. This is the story of the temple that ate names. And once you've heard it, you may find yourself asking, if no one remembers your name, did you ever exist at all? Let us begin. The road ended before the forest began. Mai stood at the edge of the gravel path, the engine of her rented motorbike ticking in the cooling silence. Before her, the jungle loomed, lush, oppressive, and humming with the secret life of 1,000 unseen things. It wasn't marked on any map, but the old woman at the village shrine had traced the route for her with one long brown finger. Not a word had been spoken, just the movement of that wrinkled hand drawing a line through dust. Now she was here, alone, carrying a boy who no longer breathed. In the basket strapped to her back, wrapped in linen and bound with red thread, was the small clay urn that held what remained of her son, Niran. 5 years old when the fever took him. 5 days after his father's anniversary. 5 months since Mai had stopped recognizing the woman she saw in the mirror. She stepped off the bike and into the forest. The air shifted as if inhaling her presence, moist and thick with decay. Roots twisted beneath the earth like sleeping serpents. She walked carefully, each step deliberate, as if any sudden movement might wake something ancient beneath the soil. The village behind her was a silent place of low voices and eyes that never met hers. Old men played checkers in the market without speaking. Children were hurried indoors when she passed. Even the dogs had avoided her, ears tucked low. Mai had lived in Bangkok for more than a decade, long enough to forget what real silence felt like. Out here, silence had weight. Out here, silence watched. The forest trail was barely a trail at all. Twigs snapped beneath her sandals, leaves brushed her arms like hesitant fingers. The deeper she went, the colder it became, as if the sun itself refused to follow. And then she saw it. A tree. Not large, not towering, but ancient in a way that defied its size. Its bark was smooth in some places, cracked in others, covered in knotted scars. A Bodhi tree, sacred in Thai Buddhism, its heart-shaped leaves rustling with a breeze that did not touch the other trees. But what froze her breath were the names. Dozens of them, carved with precision, some fresh, some nearly erased, etched into the pale bark like offerings to something that could not be seen. One name, half swallowed by moss, stopped her heart. Mai. Not just the name, her full name, the one her mother used when scolding her, the one only her husband had whispered when they made love. The carving was fresh. She staggered back, fingers trembling. A low ringing began in her ears, like the temple bells she used to hear as a child. She looked around. The forest was still, too still. Her voice came out hoarse. "Who did this?" No answer, only the wind, no longer rustling, but groaning, a low, aching sound that passed through the leaves like breath through bone. She turned, ready to go back, but the trail had disappeared. There was no path behind her, only trees, endless, silent trees. And the name, her name, still staring at her from the tree's flesh. It took her nearly half an hour to find the way back. She didn't tell the villagers what she had seen. She didn't mention the tree, or the name, or the way the forest swallowed the trail like a closing mouth. But that night, when she returned to the small house her husband once lived in, now dusted with cobwebs and the faint scent of mildew, she found her journal open on the table. She never left it open. She never left it on the table. And on the last page, written in a hand not hers, "If your name can be written, it can be taken." The ink was still wet. The next morning the air smelled of ashes. She lit incense for Niran at dawn, as she had every morning since his death, placing the urn beside a photo of him smiling with chocolate on his cheeks. Her hand trembled as she bowed 3 times. Her mouth opened, trying to form the morning prayer, but only silence came out. It wasn't grief. It was something else, like her voice was being held behind her teeth. She spent the day walking the village. No one spoke to her. Even the monks at the edge of the marketplace lowered their heads as she passed. A man selling grilled fish turned his back. A child clung to her mother's skirt and whispered something that made the woman snatch the child away in fear. Mai stood there, feeling as though she were a shadow passing through someone else's memory. That night, she looked again at the journal. The words were gone. The page was blank. But when she turned to the mirror above the sink, her reflection was smiling. And she wasn't. She remembered what the old woman had said when she arrived, her eyes cloudy and voice like gravel. "If you carry ashes to this village, they will wake." Mai had thought she meant spirits. She had been wrong. It was something worse. It was memory, or the loss of it. 3 days passed. Each morning more names disappeared from her phone. Contacts were deleted. Old messages were missing. Her bank account was frozen. Her ID card glitched when scanned at the 7-Eleven. When she called her sister in Chiang Mai, a voice answered and said, "No one by that name exists." She checked her birth certificate. The ink of her name had smudged, like something had dragged its fingers across the paper. The urn felt heavier now, or maybe she was weaker. She began to hear whispers in the forest at night. Not words, just breath, like someone standing close to her ear, just beyond the veil of sound. She avoided the Bodhi tree until the dream came. In the dream, she was a child again, walking hand in hand with her mother through a field of white flowers. The sky was gray. Her mother let go of her hand, walking ahead. Mai called out, but her mouth made no sound. Her feet wouldn't move. And then she saw the tree, towering now, blackened, covered with names, dozens of them bleeding from the bark like wounds. At its base, her son sat cross-legged, eyes wide, his mouth sewn shut with red thread. He lifted his hand and pointed at the trunk. Her name was there, and beneath it, another, erased. She woke up with the taste of ashes on her tongue. At dawn, she returned to the tree. This time, there was no resistance, no path to lose. The forest welcomed her. The names were still there, but her name was deeper now, darker, as if the tree had absorbed the ink from her birth certificate and fed on it. And beneath her name, new letters began to form, still wet, still growing. They spelled Niran. Mai screamed, but no sound came out. Only breath, only wind, only the groaning of the name tree as if it were laughing, quietly, from deep inside its bones. The first time Mai saw her son coughing blood, it was barely a stain, a pink froth on the rim of a tissue. He had smiled at her through fever-glazed eyes and said, "Don't tell Daddy, he'll be sad." She didn't. By the time she took him to the hospital, it was already too late. Now, standing barefoot in the backyard of her late husband's ancestral home, she watched the urn of ashes beside her wilt under the weight of the afternoon sun. She'd wrapped it in white cloth, tied it with red cord, whispered a dozen prayers to make sure the soul stayed at peace, but nothing about this place felt peaceful. The village breathed like it remembered, and it remembered loss. The house creaked even when the wind was still. Floorboards shifted like someone had just stepped out of view. Her husband, Kit, had grown up here. He'd told her stories of the forest and the monks and the way spirits walked openly if you knew when not to blink. Ma used to laugh at those tales. Now she wondered if they had been warnings. That night, she couldn't sleep. The air was too quiet, too heavy. The windows seemed too thin. She lay in the dark listening to the slow tick of the wall clock, the occasional moan of the roof beams settling, and the soft creak of a floorboard from the hallway. Her breath caught. She sat up. The moonlight fell across the wooden floor like a blade. Another creak, this one closer. She didn't move, not at first. Then she rose, each step cautious, bare feet brushing against worn teak. The hallway stretched ahead, empty, save for a single photograph on the wall. Kit as a boy, standing beside an older monk whose face was mostly shadow. The door at the far end of the hall was open. She hadn't left it open. And on the floor, just beyond the threshold, something was scattered like dust. She stepped closer. Ash, a fine trail of it, leading from the urn, across the floor, out the door, and into the night. She followed it. The ash was cold underfoot, clinging to her skin like soot. It moved in a narrow line as if drawn by a careful, unseen hand. It didn't scatter in the wind. It didn't drift. It led her to the edge of the Bodhi tree, where the Bodhi tree stood waiting. Its leaves didn't move, even though the air had grown sharp with breeze. And beneath the tree, her name was still carved. But the new name, Niran, was now fully etched, the cuts fresh, the sap bleeding like tears. Mai dropped to her knees. She clutched the urn to her chest, sobbing without sound, her throat locked in some invisible cage. She rocked back and forth like a grieving mother at a funeral no one attended. When she looked up, the forest was gone. The tree stood alone in the middle of a vast white field. And a boy, no older than 5, stood beside it, staring at her with empty eyes and a sewn mouth. She screamed and woke up gasping. Morning brought no relief. Her journal was gone. the one she'd carried for years, with drawings Niran had made, with memories she'd been afraid to lose. She found it in the yard, soaked in dew, every page torn out. Only the back cover remained, scrawled across it in black ink. "If you forget, you'll be safe." She clutched the book to her chest, heart pounding. The ash trail had returned. This time, not to the tree, but to the village monastery. The monastery had once been revered. Kit told me it was older than the village itself, built on land whispered to be sacred. But when she arrived, the gates were closed and locked with a rusted chain. The chimes were still. The statues of the guardians wore moss like burial robes. She banged on the wooden gate. Nothing. She called out. Still nothing. But when she turned to leave, a voice came softly behind her, old, male, and weathered like old driftwood. "Your name is not safe here." She turned. An elderly monk stood behind the gate, his eyes milky but aware, his mouth lined with deep creases. Mai stepped forward. "You know me?" He did not answer. He only said, "There are places in the world where names are currency, and in this village that currency has long since gone dark." Her voice trembled. "The tree, why does it have names on it?" The monk shook his head. "It is not a tree, it is a gate, and every name carved upon it is a door opened." Mai stared at him, her hands gripping the iron bars. "I didn't carve it." "You didn't have to," he said. "Your grief carved it for you." Later that night, she opened her phone. Every photo of Niran was gone, every video deleted, even the one she had hidden in the cloud, labeled with a fake name, protected in a locked folder, was no longer there. When she tried to search for it, the folder simply blinked and closed itself. Mai sobbed, but the tears didn't fall. They stayed in her throat, heavy and bitter. She looked at her contact list. Her mother, number not found. Her best friend, unknown error. Her sister, no such user. She called the only person left who might still remember, Kit's uncle, who lived in Lampang. The call connected. A slow breath on the other end. "Hello?" "Uncle, it's Mai. Do you remember me?" Silence. "I'm Kit's wife. I came back to the village. Niran, he interrupted, voice low, confused. "Kit never married." She dropped the phone. For a moment the world was too quiet. Then the wind outside rose in a low harmonic wail. It was not the rustling of leaves, not the sigh of air. It was a name. Her name. Spoken not by one voice, but many. Mai ran into the yard, clutching the urn, eyes scanning the trees. The Bodhi tree was still, but she could feel it watching. Something was changing. Not outside, but within. She looked at her arms. The scars she'd had from childhood, gone. The small tattoo on her wrist, faded, barely a smudge. Her reflection in the kitchen window blinked, out of sync. She called out into the forest, voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" And from the trees, something whispered back, not in Thai, not in any language she knew, but she understood it all the same. "You came to forget, and now you will." The forest didn't ask her to come back. It simply opened its arms again. At dawn, after another sleepless night, Mai wrapped the urn tighter in cloth, slipped on her sandals, and walked. She didn't eat, she didn't tell anyone. No one would have answered her anyway. The Bodhi tree didn't appear this time. It wasn't necessary. The forest remembered her, and this time it led her deeper. She followed a trail that wasn't there the day before. It curved in slow arcs, winding between gnarled roots and fallen branches, growing narrower with every step. The trees leaned in, close enough to whisper. There were markings on the bark now, symbols she didn't recognize, curved lines, closed loops, strokes made with sharp, deliberate hands. Some glowed faintly under the filtered light. Others bled sap that smelled of old incense. The deeper she went, the colder it became. And then it revealed itself. The temple stood broken and rotting beneath a veil of vines. Wat Chut Nam. It was smaller than she imagined, less a grand structure, more a ruin swallowed by the jungle. But the air around it was thick with memory, the kind that pressed against the skin like heat. The steps were cracked stone, overgrown and crooked. A pair of guardian lions once flanked the entrance, now crumbled to stumps. One had no face, the other had too many. She stepped inside. It was colder than outside. Not the cold of weather, the cold of absence, like the walls had forgotten what warmth felt like. Inside, the floor was covered in dust and fragments of wood. The once golden Buddha statue at the far end had been decapitated, its body slumped in decay. Candles had long since melted into puddles of hardened wax. Incense sticks were frozen mid-burn. And there, at the center of the room, was the altar. Stone, cracked, stained dark with something that wasn't quite blood, but hadn't always been stone either. And behind the altar, barely visible through the shadows, was a figure. Seated, still, wrapped in orange robes so faded they were almost gray. Mai froze. The figure did not move. She stepped forward, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Hello?" she whispered. No answer. My name is..." And then the figure moved. A hand rose, slow, deliberate, not in greeting, in warning. The hood lifted just enough to reveal the jaw. It was stitched shut. The thread was black, and it pulsed with something that writhed just beneath the skin. The figure raised the other hand and pointed at her, and spoke, not with its mouth, but with a voice that filled the room from nowhere and everywhere at once. "To speak your name here is to give it away." Mai stumbled back, breath shallow. She turned to run, but the doorway had vanished. The walls had closed in, and behind her the altar began to glow faintly, like embers buried in ash. A memory surfaced, not her own, but vivid all the same. A row of monks kneeling in this very room, heads bowed, voices chanting, their names echoing in the dark. Then silence. One by one they faded, not died, they faded, until only one remained, the one with the stitched mouth. And then she understood. This place didn't worship forgetting, it fed on it. The robed figure stood now, slowly unfolding from its seated posture. Mai backed away, nearly tripping over the cracked tiles. "Please," she begged, voice hoarse, "I only came to..." The voice came again. "You came to forget." She shook her head. "I didn't know." "But you asked for it." The urn in her hands vibrated, not from outside, from within. A thin crack spread along its base. Mai gasped. "No, please, no." She placed the urn on the altar, trying to steady it, and then she did what she had been warned not to do. She tried to ground herself, tried to remember who she was. "My name is—" The moment the words left her lips, the temple breathed. It inhaled her. The air grew thick, the dust swirled violently, the candles lit themselves with blue flame, the shadows bent inward. Her voice echoed, twisted, split apart into pieces. The figure stepped back. The altar pulsed. A sound filled the temple, a low moaning wail like wind trapped in a coffin, and from the cracks in the walls something began to seep. Black, thick, and whispering. Mai tried to run again, but her legs would not obey. Her body had become heavy, her feet rooted, her voice gone. The altar opened, not physically, spiritually, like a mouth widening to accept her offering. The urn cracked fully in half. A wave of ash spilled forward and vanished before it touched the ground, and with it, a voice. Small, childlike, soft. "Mama." Mai collapsed. Her knees hit stone. Her hands trembled. She looked up and saw him. Niran, standing just beyond the altar, eyes wide, face pale, mouth stitched, just like the monk. She reached out, sobbing, choking on his name, but it wouldn't come. Her lips moved, but her own name now eluded her. It was gone. Then the child vanished, not faded, not walked away. One blink, and he was never there. The robed figure sat again, its voice one last time. Once spoken, it cannot be taken back. The candles extinguished, the glow faded, and the door returned. Mai crawled out on trembling hands and knees, her mind splintering. She didn't know how long she wandered, hours, maybe days. But when she finally stumbled back into the village, covered in dust, her face streaked with tears, no one recognized her, not even herself. The village did not open its doors for strangers, but Mai wasn't a stranger, not exactly. She had lived here once, slept in this same wooden house when she was newly married, laughed under this roof when her son first learned to speak. She had walked this path to the market holding his tiny hand, and yet now, as she stepped through the gate of her late husband's family home, no memory of that life would settle in her mind. Her footsteps felt foreign on familiar ground. The door creaked open. Dust had reclaimed the house in her absence. Thin layers coated the shelves, the fan, the family photos. She touched the frame of one picture, her, Kit, and baby Niran at a temple festival, and flinched. Her face was smudged, not the glass, the photograph itself, as if time or something older had begun erasing her. The urn was gone. She searched every room, every cabinet, every corner. The broken urn that had cracked open on the altar was no longer where she had dropped it upon returning. Only a ring of ash remained on the wooden floorboards, and at the center of the ring, a single object, a child's marble, red, glassy, and warm. When she picked it up, a whisper echoed behind her ear. "You're forgetting him, aren't you?" She spun. No one was there. Only silence. Only the slow ticking of a broken clock that hadn't worked in years. She began writing her name on the walls. It was the only thing that felt real. Mai. Over and over. In ink. In chalk. With fingernails when nothing else was near. But every night, the writing faded. By morning, the walls were clean. By morning, even her hand no longer remembered how the letters should look. One night, she drew her face in the mirror with lipstick, as if marking the features she feared would disappear. Eyes, mouth, nose. But by dawn, the mirror reflected something else. A woman close to her shape. But her eyes were empty, her mouth sewn, and where the name tag on her shirt should be, only blood. Mai returned to the temple. She didn't plan it. She simply walked as if her body remembered what her mind did not. But the path was no longer the same. It twisted through places that shouldn't exist. A rice field with no horizon, a river that flowed backward, a line of red cloth tied from tree to tree, fluttering without wind. The villagers said the temple didn't exist. They refused to name it. Some pretended not to hear her when she asked. Others said, "It's gone, long gone, buried under silence." But silence could not bury what the forest chose to keep. She followed a black dog into the woods. It didn't bark, it didn't look back, it simply walked, and somehow she knew to follow. Through thorns that didn't cut, through shadows that didn't move, through a fog that didn't burn away. They arrived at a clearing where the bodhi tree once stood, but it had changed. Now it was larger, and the bark was peeling like skin. More names than before, some still bleeding, some upside down, and beneath the lowest branch, a new carving. Niran, Mai. Both names crossed out, not scratched, etched away, erased. She screamed into the sky, but her voice came out wrong. It echoed with a second tone. Not an echo, another voice, hers but hollow. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the marble in her hand like a lifeline. The dog watched, then turned and walked toward the trees. Mai followed again. They came upon a structure hidden in moss, a shrine of some kind, built into the earth, half buried. At its entrance, dozens of child-sized sandals, worn, damp, facing inward. Inside, the walls were covered in names, written on paper, pinned with nails, hung on string. Some had ink, some were painted in red, some were still dripping. She walked along the wall and saw names that made her heart clench. Old classmates, Kit's cousin, her childhood teacher, people she had forgotten until that moment and might forget again. And then her name, pinned crooked, torn at the corner. And beneath it, a note written in a different hand. Remembering you hurts more than forgetting you. She didn't sleep that night. She tried to call her mother again. The phone rang once, then a voice answered. Not her mother's, a child's. "Mama?" Mai dropped to the phone. The screen cracked. The signal died. The next morning, she heard chanting. Faint, from somewhere deep in the woods. She followed it barefoot, guided only by the sound. Low voices, not human, too many throats. She found a circle of stones. At the center, a shallow pit, filled with ash, filled with marbles, hundreds of them, all red. She dropped hers in. The chanting stopped. The forest exhaled. And she felt something inside her unravel. She forgot the way back. Each time she tried to return to the village, the trees rearranged themselves. The sun never moved, the birds never sang. She began to forget her purpose, why she came, who she was. The only thing that remained was the name, Niran, etched behind her eyes like a scar. Then came the dreams. They were no longer just memories. They were instructions, rituals, chants, symbols she drew on the floor in her sleep. She woke with soot on her hands, with red thread around her fingers, and sometimes with voices still whispering in her ears. One more name, and you will be free. She found a scroll under her pillow one morning, ancient, crumpled, written in red. She could not read the words, but her mouth knew them, as if it had spoken them before, as if it wasn't the first time she had done this. In the distance, the temple bells rang, even though no one lived there, even though no one remembered building them. And Mai, no longer sure who she was, stood in the middle of the forest, arms outstretched, name erased from the world, and whispered to the trees, "Tell me what to do." And the forest answered, not in words, but with a door, one that opened only when no one was looking. And inside, the next piece of the ritual, waiting for her. The village elder's voice was almost too soft to follow, but Mai didn't interrupt, didn't blink, didn't move. She sat across from him on the bamboo mat, the smell of sandalwood lingering faintly between them. His hut was filled with shadows. Tall, unmoving figures clung to the corners like eavesdroppers, though no one else was there. She had returned from the forest barefoot, eyes hollow, name almost forgotten. The villagers still didn't call her by anything, but the elder had seen something in her face, maybe memory, maybe warning, and invited her in. And now he spoke. Long ago, there was a monastery hidden deep in this forest, not Wat Chuit Nam, not by name. It was never meant to be named. That was the point. Mai's lips parted, her voice barely existed. Why? The elder poured tea, but did not drink. Because names are threads, and threads bind the soul to the body, to the world. His hand trembled slightly. But the monks, they sought something else. They believed that to achieve absolute detachment, to truly reach nirvana, they had to erase every thread, memory, identity, self. Mai looked down at her fingers. The red thread she had woken with yesterday was gone. The elder continued. They called it Pra Bot Luk Chua, the ritual of unnaming, a secret path, forbidden, not recorded in any scripture. They fasted, prayed, meditated until their own names tasted foreign. His eyes darkened. and when the names no longer held meaning, they carved them into the altar stone, so the temple would remember them instead. Mai shivered. Why would they want to forget themselves? The elder met her gaze. Because grief attaches us. As long as we remember who we are, we remember who we lost. He paused. Some had lost everything. Wives, children, entire lineages wiped by famine, war, plague. So they came here, not to die, but to dissolve. The wind outside rustled the chimes. But the ritual, it went wrong. He lowered his voice. The last monk didn't finish it. His name clung to him, refused to fade. He stitched his own mouth shut so it could never escape again. And now, he stopped. Mai leaned closer. Now? The elder whispered. Now he waits in the temple, not alive, not dead, not man, not spirit, a vessel of all forgotten things. Mai felt nausea rise in her throat. Why would my son's name be on the tree? The elder's eyes welled, not with tears, but with something deeper, a sorrow too ancient for crying. Because when you grieve deeply enough, your soul calls out. It begs to sever the thread. The temple hears, the monk listens. He reached into a small wooden box beside him, pulled out a folded piece of parchment, gave it to her. This was left at my door the night before you arrived. Mai opened it. Her name, Kit's name, Niran's name, all three, written in red. Underneath a symbol, a circle, a slash, and a single upside-down character that looked like a flame. The elder said, "That symbol means returnless. Once marked, the path has no turning back." That night she dreamed of the monks, not as they were, but as they became, kneeling in a circle, their bodies thin, hollow, skin like parchment, eyes empty. Each held a small blade. Each carved their name into their own chest. One by one, they pressed their foreheads to the altar and vanished. Not into death, but into something deeper. She awoke gasping. The dream had left something behind. Red stains on her fingertips, ash under her tongue. Mai began seeing the monks during the day, reflections that weren't hers, figures in doorways that vanished when approached, whispers when she tried to remember her son's voice. Once, in the mirror, she saw them behind her, 7 of them, standing in a crescent, mouths stitched, eyes sewn, chests carved with names she could almost read. She turned. Nothing. But the smell of incense remained. The forest changed too. It no longer needed her to walk it. It came to her. Vines in her room, leaves falling from the ceiling, a crack in the floor that pulsed with chanting at night. Sometimes she'd wake and find dirt under her nails. Sometimes her pillow was gone. Sometimes she didn't know where she was. And then came the fireflies, thousands of them, flickering in patterns, forming shapes. Once they spelled his name in the air, Niran. Another night they formed a path out her door and into the woods. She followed, not because she trusted them, because she had no choice. They led her to a hidden chamber near the base of the old shrine. There, Carved into the stone wall were hundreds of names, but not human names. Emotions, anger, loneliness, regret, mother, son. Each carved like an offering, and beneath them, my forgot. She fell to her knees and screamed until her throat tore. But still, no one heard. Only the silence, only the shadows of the monks who had once sat in this very room, unbinding themselves from the world, one syllable at a time. And now, she had joined them. Not in ritual, but in purpose. Not yet erased, but unraveling. She stopped speaking, not because she chose to, but because her voice no longer obeyed her. At first, it was subtle, a forgotten word here, a stammer there, the feeling of a thought slipping through the cracks before it reached her lips. But within days, her voice felt like it belonged to someone else. She would try to say her name out loud, and nothing would come, not even a whisper, only the hollow rasp of breath scraping past her throat. The villagers noticed, but said nothing. They no longer met her eyes. Children didn't look at her. Women crossed the street. Monks lowered their heads as she passed. She had become a ghost before she died. Unseen, unclaimed, untethered from the world by silence. Mai began leaving offerings, not because anyone asked her to, but because something in her demanded it. Each morning, before sunrise, she walked to the edge of the forest and laid down something personal. A strand of hair, a fingernail, a torn photo, the corner of a baby blanket she hadn't realized she still carried. She arranged them on banana leaves, tied with red thread, and placed a stick of incense beside each one. She could not pray aloud, but she bowed 3 times, and in the stillness that followed, the forest answered. The air would shift, the leaves would flutter, and sometimes something unseen would take the offering before the smoke faded. One morning, she found a new object left in return. A small bell, cracked, tied with black string. No sound came from it when she shook it, but that night, as she tried to sleep, she heard it ringing from under her bed, from inside the walls, from beneath her skin. She began waking up in places she didn't remember walking to. Once in the middle of the rice paddies, another time on the steps of the monastery, hands folded in prayer. She'd be barefoot, covered in ash, mouth tasting of iron. And always, the bell would be in her hand, still silent, still warm. The dreams returned, stronger now, more vivid. In them, the monks performed rituals she could almost understand. They moved in circles, chanted without voices, offered pieces of themselves into bowls, flesh, bone, teeth. In one dream, a monk placed his own tongue in her hand. She woke gagging on something soft, but there was nothing in her mouth, only blood on the pillow. That day, she could no longer remember her son's voice. Not the pitch, not the laughter, not even the way he had once said her name, Mama, like it was the only word he knew. It had disappeared, slipped into the cracks of her mind like water through broken stone. She clutched the photo of him so tightly it bent in half, but even that, the ink had started to run. His face was blurring, like a bad memory. She returned to the temple, not by choice, by instinct. The forest led her again. This time she brought an offering, her wedding ring. She placed it on the altar, wrapped in the last scrap of her son's baby blanket, and bowed. The silence that followed was complete, total, the kind of silence that makes you question if your heart is still beating. And then the bell rang, soft, distant, inside the temple. She turned. The monk was there again, the one with the stitched mouth. Only now one stitch had broken, and a single word slipped through. Soon. Mai collapsed, not from fear, from release. The word settled in her bones like ash. She lay on the cold stone floor, breathing through cracked lips, knowing something had shifted. The ritual had begun. Not the ancient one, her own. That night, she could not find her reflection. Every mirror in her house had gone dark, not broken, not covered, just blank. She touched the glass and felt nothing. No temperature, no resistance, just the sensation of touching a memory that no longer remembered her. In the center of the largest mirror, words appeared, drawn from condensation that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Offer what remains. She emptied drawers, turned out boxes, tore through every corner of the house. She found a water recorder with a single clip of Niran singing, a hospital wristband from the day of his birth, her own student ID card from university. 3 things that still proved she had lived. She placed them in a clay bowl, tied it shut with red thread, and walked into the forest. The trees opened for her like a mouth, and when she reached the shrine, she placed the bowl on the altar and bowed, then waited, and waited, until the wind carried a sound, dripping. She looked up. The bowl was gone. In its place, a slip of cloth, sewn with her name. But the letters were incomplete. The final syllable had unraveled. The next day, the villagers buried a stranger. They said a woman had died near the river, face down, nameless. Mai watched the funeral from the shadows. The body had no name, but she recognized the dress. It was hers. She was not dead, but the world had begun to replace her, erase the original, prepare a space for the one who would remain after forgetting was complete. And still, she could not leave. That night, she whispered to the wind, "Tell me how to end it." And for the first time, the wind answered, not in a voice, but in a sensation, a pull, toward the altar, toward the monk, toward the ritual that awaited her final offering, herself.
Mai stopped recognizing the people around her, not because their faces changed, but because their faces were no longer there. It began with strangers, a woman at the well, a boy chasing a chicken through the yard, a merchant arranging fruit at his stall. Their heads were shaped like humans, their bodies moved naturally, their mouths opened when they spoke. But she saw no eyes, no noses, just smooth, pale skin stretched where identity should be. At first she thought it was the light, or exhaustion, or madness, until they turned and looked at her with no eyes, and somehow she knew they saw her. Worse, they remembered her. That night she locked every door in the house, barred the windows, lit candles in every room, But when she passed the hallway mirror, 3 faceless figures stood behind her. Not reflections, real, standing in her home, watching her with sightless awareness. She spun around. The hallway was empty. When she turned back to the mirror, they were closer, and one of them tilted its head, as if asking her to follow. She slept with the lights on. It didn't help. The house began to breathe. The walls expanded and contracted as though lungs pressed behind the wallpaper. The floorboards pulsed. The ceiling groaned. Sometimes she heard footsteps in rooms that no longer existed. Once she woke up to the sound of humming, soft, lullaby slow. She followed it to the kitchen, where she found a bowl of rice placed gently on the table, steam still rising. She hadn't cooked it. And on the wall above it, a child's handprint, small, ashy, fading. She started writing her name again, this time on her skin, down her arms, across her chest, on the inside of her wrists. My. She carved it in ink, then in blood when ink ran out. But each morning the letters vanished. Her skin healed, like the world rejected her attempt to remember. The monk with the stitched mouth appeared more often, not just in the temple, everywhere, in the market, beside the river, standing at the foot of her bed, always silent, always watching. Sometimes he lifted a hand, as if reaching out, as if asking for something. One night she whispered, hoarse, "What do you want from me?" The stitches trembled, but he said nothing, only turned and pointed toward the forest, toward the temple, toward the end. Then the nightmares changed. They were no longer dreams. They were memories, but not hers. She saw through the monk's eyes, walked in their sandals, knelt at the altar, felt the blade carve her own name into stone. Each time she felt less like Mai. Each time her own name sounded more foreign. Once she heard herself ask, "Who was I before this?" And no one answered, not even her. She began hearing footsteps outside her door at night, slow, heavy, dragging, then whispers, dozens of them. Some sounded old, wheezing like dry lungs, others small, childlike, all calling the same word over and over. Not her name, just one word, remember. She opened the door. The night was still, the air frozen, the path empty. And then she looked down. Bare footprints, hundreds of them, leading away from the house, into the fog. Tiny child footprints, large adult footprints, some barefoot, some with monk sandals, some with no toes. She followed. They led her to the riverbank. Moonlight shimmered on the water's surface, undisturbed. No wind, no frogs, no sound, just stillness. And then she saw them, standing in the shallow water, dozens of figures, men, women, children, all facing her, all faceless, their heads tilted in unison, as if listening, as if waiting. She should have run. Instead, she asked, "Who are you?" Silence. Then one of them stepped forward, closer, closer, its neck bent, its shoulders twitched, its featureless face hovered inches from hers, and though there were no eyes, she felt it staring into her soul. A message slipped into her mind. "We gave up our names." The figure lifted a hand, pressed it gently over her heart, cold, wet, empty. Another voice entered her mind. "Will you?" She stumbled back, breath shallow,
No, I can't. A third voice, soft, childlike. Then he will. The figures turned their heads. Behind them, deeper in the river's reflection, she saw him. Niran, standing on the water's surface, mouth sewn shut, hands reaching, eyes full of something more terrifying than death, regret. She ran. The figures didn't chase her. They didn't have to. They would wait. Spirits without faces had time. They had forever. She stopped speaking completely. Words became dangerous. Names had power. Sound itself felt like invitation. She communicated only in gestures, even to herself. She thought in silence. And still, the villagers stopped noticing her entirely. She passed a group of men repairing a roof. Not one looked up. A woman bumped into her in the market, then apologized to the air behind her. Even dogs walked past her without sniffing, as though she were already gone, as though her body still moved, but her existence had slipped. One afternoon, as she washed her hands at the well, a girl approached her. Mai froze. No one had approached her in weeks. The girl couldn't have been more than 8. She wore a faded pink dress and carried a lotus flower in her left hand. She stopped in front of Mai and stared at her face, head tilted. Mai waited for the child to flinch or turn away or act afraid. Instead, the girl smiled and said, "You're the one who can see us." Mai's blood turned to ice. The girl's face was normal, human, beautiful, alive. Mai opened her mouth, but no sound came. The girl leaned close, whisper soft, "They're waiting for you." Mai trembled. "Who?" The girl's expression shifted, sad, old, ancient. The ones who lost their names. And just like that, her face started to fade. Eyes first, then nose, then mouth, like ink dissolving in water. Mai stepped back in horror. The girl lifted her hand, pressing her palm to Mai's cheek with ghost-soft fingers, and, in a voice that no longer came from lips, she said, "When the last name is gone, you will be one of us." That night, Mai sat alone in the dark, hugging her knees, rocking slowly. The walls whispered, the floor breathed, the bell rang softly from the corner of the room, even though no one touched it. She closed her eyes and saw faces. Not hers, not Niran's. Faces she had forgotten. Faces of people she once knew. Neighbors, friends, family, all blank. Their memories dissolved, their identities consumed, their stories buried in unmarked graves of silence. She clutched her head, shaking. "No, no, please!" And from somewhere deep within the house, she heard a voice she had not heard in weeks. Her own voice, calling her name, Mai. But it wasn't a memory, it was a warning. Because the voice didn't sound like her. It sounded like something wearing her name, using her name one last time before taking it forever. Her name used to be a comfort, called out by her child in delight, written on forms, whispered in prayer, carved in memory. Now it was a danger. Now it was a curse. And yet, now it was calling her. It began in dreams, a soft voice at first, coming from the trees. Mai. Always just out of reach, always echoing from behind her, always hers, yet not spoken by her. In the dream, she would chase the sound barefoot through fog, tripping over roots that didn't exist, thorns that cut but left no marks. The voice would grow louder, more desperate. My, until she woke, alone, shaking, heart hammering, and the name still ringing in her ears. Then it started during the day. She would be washing clothes and hear it whispered behind her. She would walk the market path, and it would slither through the wind. She asked no one, told no one. There was no one left to hear, except the name, her name. It had become the only thing that remembered her, and it refused to be forgotten. One afternoon, she stood in the courtyard, staring at the Bodhi tree. It had grown again, taller, wider, its bark splitting in long, dark veins. The names carved into it pulsed faintly now, like veins beneath translucent skin. And at the very top, her name, still there, still carved, but reversed. Not misspelled, not distorted, just backward. As if even the tree had begun forgetting how she was meant to be remembered. She placed her hand against it. It felt warm, too warm, and from the bark came a whisper. Say it. She flinched. Say it aloud. She backed away. The tree groaned. The wind surged, and her voice cracked open. My. It came out in a whisper, dry, broken, but it echoed through the forest like a scream. The leaves trembled, the sky darkened, and far, far in the distance, the temple bells rang. That night, she lost her reflection entirely. The mirror showed her outline, her movements, but not her features. No eyes, no lips, no skin, just shadow swimming in fog. She touched her face. It was still there, but her eyes told a different truth. The sound of her name echoed again, this time from under the bed. She crouched and found the bell, still cracked, still tied in black string, but this time it rang when she touched it. A soft, hollow chime, like a warning, like a door creaking open in the dark. She started hearing her name in places where no sound should exist, in the silence between footsteps, in the rhythm of the wind, in the hum of the ceiling fan. Even in the rice she cooked, bubbling as if it whispered to her between the steam. Once she dropped a spoon, and as it clattered across the floor, it rang out her name. My, as if the world itself had begun mocking her, or mourning her, or both. She returned to the elder. He looked older, frailer. His hands trembled more than before. His voice was the creak of a dying tree. He did not greet her. He simply said, "It's begun." Mai nodded. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "No one does. I wanted to forget the pain, not myself." He stared into her face, as if searching for pieces that were no longer there. "The temple doesn't take requests, only names." He handed her a cloth-wrapped object. Inside, a ritual book, bound in string, pages made of thin bark, words written in old Lana script, charcoal black and bleeding. The cover had no title, only a circle with a single line cutting through it, the symbol of severance. "This book," he said, "was left behind one who remembered too long." "What happened to them?" she asked. The elder did not answer, but his eyes filled with tears, and in that silence she knew. She studied the book for hours. The pages whirred when touched. The ink faded and returned. The symbols changed, but one line remained the same. To remember a name is to anchor the soul. To speak it aloud is to offer it. She spoke hers again. "My," and the book grew warm in her hands. Another page turned itself. Another chant appeared. Kam Rak Chu, the incantation of love for the forgotten name. She read it aloud, not knowing what would happen, not caring anymore. She just needed to feel real again. The air shimmered, the walls sighed, and for 1 second she saw him. Niran, standing in the doorway, his eyes wide, his skin glowing faintly, his mouth still sewn shut, but he was reaching for her. Her breath caught. "Niran," she whispered. He stepped closer. Tears welled in her eyes. She knelt down, arms open. "It's me. It's Mama. I'm here." But when he opened his mouth, the stitches split. Blood poured out, and a voice, not his, came through. 100 voices, all whispering her name. "My, my, my," she screamed, and he vanished. She ran to the temple, barefoot, wild, burning. The path was open, the forest parted for her. Inside, the altar pulsed with light. The monk waited. His mouth had more stitches now, and his eyes had closed. But still, he lifted one hand, pointed to her chest, and she understood. The name had rooted too deep. To forget him, she had to forget herself. To remember him, she had to be erased. She knelt at the altar. Her hands shook. She placed the bell on the stone. The monk began to hum. No mouth, no voice. Still, sound came. A low chant, a sorrowful lullaby. The walls of the temple vibrated. The names carved on stone began to bleed. "My," whispered, "just let me hear him one more time. Let him say my name." The monk stopped humming, and in the silence that followed, a voice came, soft, pure, real. "Mama." She wept, collapsed to the floor, and whispered her name one more time. "My, my, my." The sound cracked like thunder, and the world shifted. Mai tried to write her name again the next morning. She found a charcoal pencil in the bottom drawer, the kind Kit used to use to mark his sketches. She took it to the mirror, pressed it to the glass, wrote each letter carefully. M, A, I. She stared at it, breathing hard, and then the strokes began to blur. Not smudge, not fade. The lines unraveled, curling into strange shapes, like language twisting in on itself. Her own name liquefied into something else,
something that didn't belong in this world. Within seconds, the mirror was blank. She tried again, this time on paper, a notebook page, fresh, white. She wrote her name 3 times, then turned away. When she looked back, all 3 had vanished. Only faint indentations remained, as if someone had whispered the letters away before the ink could dry. She pressed harder, scratched the pencil deep, but even carved into the page, the lines bent, shifted, rearranged. M became W. A turned sideways. The I bent backwards until it resembled a snake's tongue. She blinked, furious tears welling. "Why?" she whispered. "Why can't I hold on to myself?" The notebook fell to the floor, and for a second, just a breath, she saw Naran's face in the paper grain. Blank, mouthless, as if waiting. The house began to forget her too. Cabinets she had organized 100 times were unfamiliar. The floor creaked in places that never creaked before. Doors led to different rooms. Once she stepped into the bathroom and emerged in the kitchen. Another time, she opened her closet and found the forest inside. No sky, no wind, just trees. She closed the door, heart pounding. When she opened it again, it was empty, as if the forest had retreated, but not far. She began leaving notes for herself, sticky scraps on the walls, reminders of who she was. "Your name is Mai. Your son was Naran. You lived here. You were loved." But the ink ran. Every morning, the messages warped. "You are pain. Your son was near. You lied here. You were nothing." She stopped using ink, switched to blood. It stayed longer, but not forever. At the monastery, the bells tolled at midnight. They were rusted through, shattered, chained in silence, yet still they rang. She woke to the sound, stepped outside, and saw smoke rising from the temple's roof. Not fire, incense, sweet, cloying, the kind used in funerals. She walked barefoot to the edge of the rice field. The path was clear. It always was now. The temple wanted her back. Inside, the monk had moved. No longer behind the altar, he sat in the center of the room, surrounded by scrolls, ash, bones, children's bones, tiny, arranged in a circle. Skulls cracked, some with symbols burned into the bone. Mai didn't flinch. She stepped inside. The air welcomed her, as if recognizing one of its own. The monk pointed to the floor. A new scroll had appeared, still warm, still wet. Her name, half-formed, dripped in fresh black ink across its surface. Not written, not carved, spilled from her. She touched her lips. They were bleeding. She hadn't noticed. The ink wasn't ink at all. It was her. She took the scroll, opened it fully. Her life was on the page. Not events, not facts, feelings, joy, fear, grief. Each one etched into a single word she no longer recognized, but she felt them all the same. And at the bottom, written in shaking calligraphy, "The last time someone remembers your name is the moment you disappear." She looked up. The monk raised a hand, held a brush, and offered it to her. She took it.
dipped it into the bowl beside him. It wasn't ink. It was memory. Thick, crimson, flickering with images. Kit's smile, Niran's first breath, her wedding sari, the way sunlight looked on temple steps. Each image bled into the next, swirling into red. She lifted the brush, hesitated. "If I write it," she whispered, "will I lose it forever?" The monk nodded once. She turned to the blank scroll beside her, touched brush to page, wrote, "My." The ink sizzled, the scroll caught fire, and the flames whispered, "You're almost free." She left the temple staggering. Her legs no longer felt real. The wind passed through her body as if she were already gone. The villagers watched her from their porches, but their eyes were hollow, their faces blank. Even the elder, now faceless, nodded once as if to say goodbye, or good riddance. She found a mirror on the side of the road, broken, discarded. She lifted it, and for the first time, saw nothing. Not even a shape. Not even a shadow. She was gone from reflection. But the whisper remained. "You still have one thing left." She ran home, dug through the last box in the attic, found an old recorder, batteries corroded. She wiped it clean, replaced them, pressed play. Static. Then, Niran's voice. "Mama, look! I'm singing! La la la!" She wept, fell to her knees, pressed her forehead to the speaker. But as it played, the pitch warped, slowed, twisted, until the recording began whispering back, "My, my, my." And then, "You don't belong here anymore." She threw the recorder against the wall. It shattered, but the whisper kept coming. From the pieces, from the air, from inside her chest. She turned to the last place she hadn't gone, the altar beneath the shrine, the place where names were kept and stolen. She walked there at midnight, carried no offerings, no prayers, only silence. The door opened before she knocked. Inside, candles lit themselves, and a scroll waited, blank. She picked up the brush, touched it to her fingertip. Blood bloomed, and she began to write the final word, her last word, her real name, not the one she was born with, the one she had become, the one no one else would ever speak. There is a kind of silence that breathes. Mai had come to know it well. It was not the silence of peace, not the hush before a storm. It was the silence of spaces abandoned by the living, where even sound had learned to forget its name. That silence filled the temple now. As Mai crossed the threshold, she felt it wrap around her bones. The air inside was thick, not with smoke, not with incense, but with memory. It hung like mist, scentless and slow. Each breath she took felt like inhaling forgotten prayers, words never finished, syllables lost to time. The monk sat in the center, no longer behind the altar, no longer cloaked in shadow. He was waiting for her. His mouth was no longer fully stitched. Only one thread remained, thin, frayed, pulsing with each breath. His eyes were shut, but Mai felt them see her. A circle of symbols had been drawn on the floor in black ash. Inside it, a mat, a bowl, and a relic she didn't recognize. A child's rattle, cracked, wooden, wrapped in faded red cloth. She stepped inside the circle. The air shifted. Something unseen closed behind her. The monk lifted one hand, slow and deliberate, and motioned for her to sit. She obeyed. No words were spoken. None were needed. The bowl before her steamed faintly, though no fire burned. She looked into it and saw not water, not oil, but movement, fragments of memory. Her child's face, his laugh, the moment he slipped from her arms in the hospital room, limp and burning. The bowl pulsed, and then stilled. The monk began to hum. It was not a melody. It was older, deeper, the echo of something born before music. It vibrated through the floor, through the stone, through her. The chant had no words, only shape. It filled her chest with soundless pressure, the kind that throbbed behind the eyes, the kind that made teeth ache. The hollow chant. She remembered the elder whispering of it long ago. A chant that leaves no echo because it carries no self. To speak it was to vanish from the world. The monk raised a bowl of black ash and tipped it forward. It spilled across the circle's edge, completing a final ring. She watched as the ash snaked around her, enclosing her, trapping her, or protecting her. She couldn't tell. Then he placed the rattle in front of her and pointed to it. She stared at the object. Old, childlike, covered in dust. But when she reached out to touch it, a sound filled the room. A cry. A child's. Niran. Sharp, piercing. Mama! The room shook. The candles flickered. The rattle spun on its own, emitting a hollow jingle that sounded like bones inside. She clutched her ears. "Stop!" she whispered. "Please, stop!" The monk did not move. The chant did not stop. The bowl beside her swirled. Now it showed images, fast, disjointed. Her own face forgotten by her husband, her name struck from birth records, her sister walking through a house where Mai had never lived, her mother lighting incense for a daughter who had never been born. Mai gasped. The world was erasing her, not killing, replacing. The monk motioned again. She knew what he wanted. To complete the chant, to let go, to surrender her name fully. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. A breath, a syllable. Then her shadow shifted. It moved before her body did. It turned, looked at her, and smiled. A wide, cruel grin, as if saying, "Too late." She fell backward, crawling out of the circle. But the ash burned cold, searing her hands as she crossed the line. The monk's chant grew louder. The rattle lifted into the air, spun violently, The walls of the temple began to crack. From behind the altar, other monks stepped forward, 7 of them, faceless, stitched, their hands cupped in prayer, their mouths leaking threads. One by one, they began to chant. No sound, but Mai heard it anyway, inside her bones, inside her blood. Her body began to vibrate, her skin itched, words rose in her throat, not hers. Nailu Samta, Nokakit, Chan Mai, not Thai, not Pali, not human, but real, ancient, powerful, erasing. She clutched her chest, her heartbeat fluttered like a moth trapped under glass. Her fingers twitched. One by one, the names she'd carved into her skin began to unwrite themselves. The ink ran in reverse. Her scars healed before her eyes. She was disappearing. She screamed, but it came out as a whisper. "I don't want this." A voice answered. Not the monk, the temple. "You came here to forget. Not everything. You offered your name. You completed the chant. Now there is no going back." She crawled toward the rattle, desperate, trembling. "I only wanted to forget the pain, not who I was." But the rattle kept spinning, and now she could see him, Niran, floating above it, thin, pale, flickering like smoke. He opened his eyes, his mouth no longer sewn. He spoke, but the words cut like blades. "You let me go." Mai sobbed. "No, I held you, Then why did you offer me?" "I didn't know." "You did." He reached for her, touched her cheek. His hand was ice. "You can't take it back." The monks began to vanish, one by one, their names spent, their bodies unraveling into ash. The temple groaned, the rattle cracked. Mai clutched it, screamed her name, "Mai!" And the temple fell silent. The chant stopped. The monk turned. The final stitch in his mouth unraveled, and he whispered, "Then die remembering." Mai collapsed, breathing hard. The rattle turned to dust in her hands. Niran was gone. Only smoke remained. The scrolls burned. The symbols faded. And outside, the forest sighed. She walked out of the temple, alone, alive, but not the same. Her shadow followed, but it no longer matched her steps. Her voice returned, but only one word could be spoken without pain. His name. The village did not mourn her. When Mai returned from the temple, barefoot and bruised, her hands trembling and her eyes red from sobbing, not a single head turned to watch her pass. It was as if she were walking through a memory, faded at the edges, thin as fog. She passed neighbors who once knew her. They didn't glance up. A boy who used to play with Niran ran past her feet without so much as a pause. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. The moment her lips parted, a cold pressure filled her throat, like fingers curling around the words before they could escape. She swallowed them and kept walking. Her house stood where she left it, but the key no longer worked. The door slid open anyway. Inside, everything had changed. The furniture was rearranged. The walls had been scrubbed. Every photo was gone. Every note she had written, every prayer she'd left at the altar, every item that tied her to this place, erased. Her presence had been scrubbed from the walls like smoke after a fire. Only one thing remained, a small clay shrine in the corner of the room. New, unfamiliar, adorned with fresh white flowers and a flickering candle. Mai stepped closer. The plaque read, "To the nameless mother, may she find rest." She backed away. Her knees buckled. Nameless. They didn't even remember her enough to get it wrong. She clutched her chest, trying to calm her breath, but her heart was fluttering like a bird that didn't know where the sky went. Someone had lit a funeral for her in her own house. The next morning, she went to the market, not to shop, to test something. She walked straight up to a vendor she'd known for years, Suda, the fish seller, who once called her sister and gave her salted mackerel for free during the holidays. "Suda," she whispered, "it's me, it's Mai." Suda smiled kindly, but not at her, through her, to the empty air, then turned to the next customer. Mai stood there trembling, her throat tightening again. She turned to a group of monks gathering alms. One of them looked familiar, the young novice who used to bow every morning when she brought rice for his teacher. "You know me," she pleaded. "Please, you know me." But when the novice passed her, the edge of his robe brushed her arm, and he hadn't even felt her. He hadn't even felt her. She walked through the village like a ghost. No footsteps, no name, no reflection in windows. Even the wind didn't touch her anymore. That night, she lit candles on the floor of her hollowed-out house, 7 of them, one for each day she remembered being a mother. She whispered her son's name, Niran. The flames flickered. The walls groaned. She pulled out the rattle, the one she thought had turned to dust in the temple. It was whole again, but different. The red cloth now had writing stitched across it. A name once forgotten is never fully returned. She rocked the rattle slowly. It made no sound, but from the corners of the room, shadows gathered. Not men, not ghosts. Shapes, thin, drifting. Some tall, some small. And one of them, the smallest, stepped into the candlelight. Mai held her breath. Niran? But the shadow didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at her with eyes that weren't there. She opened her arms. It didn't run. It faded. She screamed into the floor, into her knees, into the echo of herself. The house absorbed her grief in silence. Nothing gave back. She wandered the village in search of proof, of anything, a photo, a record, a mention. She visited the elder's house, but it was empty, abandoned. A note pinned to the door in red string. The memory keeper has passed. No records remain. She visited the monastery, found it locked, shuttered. The statues of the guardians had their faces smashed in, as if the temple no longer wanted anyone to be seen, not even stone. She sat on the steps until the sun rose, and for the first time, she heard laughter, children. She turned her head sharply. A group of them were playing near the riverbank. She stood, walked slowly, afraid to hope. As she approached, one of the children looked up, a girl with a ribbon in her hair. She froze. Mai had seen her before, the girl who had once whispered, "You're the one who can see us." Now the girl was solid, real, laughing, and she met Mai's eyes. "You're still here." Mai nodded. "Why can't they see me?" The girl didn't smile this time. She looked down, picked up a pebble, rolled it between her fingers. "Because you finished the first part." Mai blinked. "The first part of what?" The girl didn't answer. She handed her the pebble. It was warm, etched with a symbol she had seen only once before, on the monk's altar. A loop with a line through it. "When you give up the last thing," the girl said, "the door opens." "What door?" But the girl was already walking away, fading. Mai clutched the pebble like it was the only part of her still real. That night she walked to the Bodhi tree one last time. It stood taller than ever. The bark glistened like it was wet. The names still pulsed faintly. Her name was gone. Not erased. Replaced. In its place, Mother of No One. She stepped forward, tears blurring her vision. She placed the pebble at the base, whispered her son's name. "Niran." The tree shivered, the leaves trembled, and in the distance, she heard temple bells. But not from Wat Chut Nam, from somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath. The night she returned to the forest, it did not resist her. No branches clawed at her sleeves, no roots twisted to trip her. The air did not howl in warning. Instead, the trees parted like curtains on a stage, as if the forest itself had been waiting, welcoming her back, inviting her to finish what she had begun. The ground hummed with recognition as she stepped forward. She walked without lantern, without fear. The darkness knew her now, and she knew it back. The forest floor was soft beneath her feet, like walking on breath. Mist curled around her ankles, pulling her deeper. It no longer felt like she was entering a place. It felt like she was returning to herself. Wat Chuat Nam rose in the distance, half swallowed by vines. But tonight it looked different. No longer abandoned, no longer ruined. The stone was darker, the air was warmer. The temple felt awake, as if something inside had finally opened its eyes. Mai placed her hand on the gate. It swung open before she pushed. The silence inside was absolute, deafening, alive. She stepped across the threshold and felt the world change. Behind her, the forest vanished, not just disappeared, ceased, as if time paused outside these walls. The only reality now was this temple, this moment, this choice. The altar was no longer cold. It glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the stone. Above it, symbols drifted in the air like smoke, old Lana script fracturing and reforming like living language. Atop the altar lay something new, an urn, small, unbroken, wrapped in the same white cloth she had once used. Her breath trembled. "Niran." She stepped forward slowly, hands shaking, reached out, touched the urn. It was warm, too warm, like holding someone's body. She lifted the cloth aside and saw nothing. The urn was empty. Her knees nearly gave out. No, I brought him here. I carried him. A voice behind her, soft, male. You gave him up long before you came. Mai spun around. The monk stood in the center of the room, stitches gone, lips parted, eyes open for the first time. They were not eyes of a man. They were a river of darkness, a well without bottom, a memory without end. He stepped forward without sound. Mai forced herself to speak, her voice raw from disuse. Give him back. The monk tilted his head. He is not yours to have. He's my son. Was. The word cut deeper than any blade. Names tether, he said calmly. You named him. You built him with memory. You held him in your grief. Because I loved him. No. His voice grew colder. Because you could not let him go. Mai staggered backward. I came here to forget the pain. The monk nodded slowly. And in doing so, you offered the child. Her heart stopped. What are you saying? He stepped closer. To forget pain is to forget love. You asked to erase it all. I didn't know. Intent does not change the sacrifice. Shadows unfurled across the floor. 7 monks emerged from the walls, bodies thin as smoke, faces stitched, hands clasped in eternal prayer. They encircled her. The air chilled, the altar pulsed, and the monk spoke. The ritual is nearly complete. There is only one offering left to make. Mai trembled. What offering? Your last memory of being human. Her pulse roared in her ears. What does that mean? The monk looked at her gently, almost pitying. Let go of the name Mother, and you will be free. She shook her head violently. No, I won't forget him. The monk's eyes softened. You already are. Her breath hitched. What was his birthday? She opened her mouth. Stopped. No sound. Her mind groped for the answer, but found only emptiness. What color were his eyes? She blinked. Dark. Brown? No. Gray? No. They shifted in her memory, like smoke changing shape. What did his voice sound like? She clutched her head, tears streaming. Stop! Stop! But he didn't. Say his full name. Her lips parted, her throat strained. Nothing came. He stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. Can you even picture his face anymore? Mai collapsed, screamed without sound. Her tears hit the floor and turned to ash. The temple floor began to pulse with light, and from beneath the stones something stirred. The ground split, an opening yawned in front of the altar. Not a hole, a staircase, descending into darkness. The monk gestured. Below lies the end, the place where names go to die. And my son? His memory lingers at the edge, between becoming and gone. Mai stared at the stairs. The air that rose from below was wrong. It carried no temperature, no scent, no time. Just stillness, utter, perfect stillness. The silence of the unborn, the forgotten, the erased. The monk extended his hand. Come, finish it. Mai hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run. But run where? She had no home, no world, no name. No one remembered her. She was already halfway gone. All that remained was the choice, to disappear in agony or to disappear in peace. She stepped toward the staircase. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The monks followed. Their chants began, not hollow, full, heavy, final. The walls trembled, the earth wept, and somewhere far above, the temple bells tolled. At the bottom of the stairs, she found him, not as a shadow, not as an illusion. Nairon, sitting on the ground, back turned, head lowered, alive, or close enough. Nairon. Her voice was a breath. He turned, slow. Nothing else moved. His eyes, empty. His expression, lost. Yet when he saw her, something flickered. Her heart cracked open. She knelt in front of him. "It's me. It's Mama. I'm here." He watched her, long, silent. Then he tilted his head, softly, gently, curious. "Who?" The word hit harder than any blow. Her breath shattered. The pain came sharp, real, alive. She clutched his face, trembling. "You know me, please, you know me." His eyes blinked, slow, detached. "I don't." Her vision blurred. Her heart screamed. She held him tight, desperate. "Then I will remember for both of us. I don't care what it costs." Something shifted in the air. The chanting stopped. Everything held its breath. And from behind her, a whisper. "Then you reject the ritual." She looked back. The monk stood at the foot of the stairs, expression unreadable. "If you remember," he said softly, "you will suffer. I don't care. If you hold on, the pain will never leave. I don't care." His voice deepened. "If you choose remembrance, you will never be free." Mai held her son to her chest. Her voice broke into a trembling whisper. "Then let me suffer." The ground shuddered. The altar above roared. The temple screamed. The monks froze in place, their bodies cracking, breaking, shattering into ash. The ritual collapsed. The names carved in stone bled. The air glowed. The monk watched her quietly, then nodded, not in approval, in grief. So be it. He closed his eyes and finally spoke her name. Mai. It echoed, real, alive, recognized. And the temple wept. She didn't remember the walk back. Not the trees, not the trail, not even the steps beneath her feet. Mai only knew she had left something behind in the temple, but not her son, not her grief, herself. The forest no longer acknowledged her. Birds didn't sing. Leaves didn't rustle. The wind moved around her like she wasn't there. And in truth, she wasn't. Not fully. Her name was no longer hers. It floated behind her like ash from a fire. She could feel it trailing through the air, being whispered by the trees, caught in spider webs, tattooed into bark, fading. The village was silent. But it wasn't grief. It was indifference. My past homes with candles burning in the windows, altars lit, families seated in prayer. No one looked up. No one called out. To them, she was a visitor, a presence without weight, a figure without a name. And when she arrived at her own house, there was no shrine anymore, no plaque, just a vacant space on the floor where memory once lived. She wandered through the village like smoke, and something in her whispered, "This is the price. You chose pain. You chose memory." But she was not empty. Somehow she still felt something inside, a hum, a thread. Frayed, yes, but real. And it pulled her back to the temple one final time, not to plead, not to bargain, to finish it. The forest opened for her without hesitation. The ground no longer pulsed beneath her feet. The air didn't resist. It was as though the world had accepted what she was, a woman without tether, a name-shaped silence, the mother of a memory. But when she reached the place where Wat Chwat Nam had always stood, it was gone. No stone, no altar, no gate, only a clearing, a perfect circular absence. The grass didn't grow there. The air stood still. Even sound dared not pass through. It was as if the temple had collapsed inward, swallowed by the names it had consumed. And in its place, a hole. Mai stepped to the edge. Not a pit, not darkness. A stillness so profound it ached. A place where language died, where memory knelt, where names were never spoken. And across the void, a door, wooden, weathered, floating mid-air, closed. No walls surrounded it, no hinges held it, just the door, waiting. She stepped into the void. Her feet left no prints. Her breath did not echo. The further she walked, the more she felt the last parts of her slipping. Not her bones, not her skin, but the fragile, flickering essence that once said, "This is who I am." She reached the door. There was no handle, only a word carved across its surface. Choose. Not her name, not his, just that. And she understood. This was the final offering. Not her voice, not her body, not her memory, but the choice between erasure and freedom, or grief and existence. Behind her, something stirred. She turned. Nairan, standing where the void began, wearing the same clothes from the day of his funeral, eyes wide, silent, unsewn, alive, or close enough. She ran to him, held him, felt warmth, felt weight, felt memory. "It's me," she whispered. "Mama, say my name." He looked at her, tilted his head, smiled faintly. "I never forgot." The door creaked. Behind it, chanting, low, rhythmic, the monks. They were still there, waiting. Not for her, for her decision. Nairan took her hand. "If you walk through, you'll never feel this again. I know. No more pain, but no more you." You've already let me go." She nodded slowly. "Yes. But you still remember." She touched his face, tears falling freely. "And I always will." She turned from the door. The void pulsed. A choice made. The door vanished. The chanting stopped. The air shifted. And in the stillness that followed, she whispered one word, not for herself, but for the world. His name was Niren. The clearing trembled. Wind rushed through the trees. The forest exhaled. And in the distant mountains, a bell rang. Not cracked, not broken, but whole. The memory of the temple did not return. The place remained empty, but something was different now. A presence remained. A name had been spoken and remembered. She walked home, not as a ghost, not as a stranger, but as a woman who chose pain over peace, memory over oblivion. She would live with the ache. She would live without recognition, but she would remember. And in doing so, she would remain.
The forest had changed, or perhaps she had. Mai stood where the temple used to be, her feet planted in the soft earth of the clearing, eyes closed, breath slow. There were no gates now, no altar, no monk with a stitched mouth, but she still felt them, beneath the ground, inside the trees, hovering in the wind like threads of unfinished prayers. She had chosen, and she had paid. But she was still here, not erased, not freed, something in between. Back in the village, no one looked at her, no one spoke to her. But when she walked past, some paused, ever so briefly, as if a memory stirred, as if a breath caught in their throat, whispering something they couldn't quite place. They didn't say her name, but sometimes they turned in her direction and blinked like they'd forgotten what they were doing. And she knew. A piece of her still clung to the world, a thread not fully cut. The house was quiet. The floors no longer creaked. The windows didn't sigh. She lived among shadows now, gentle ones, familiar. They moved when she did. They listened. Each night she lit a candle by the window, just one. No photos, no shrine, no names. Only light and silence. She began writing again, not on paper, on bark, on stone, on the backs of leaves. Not full names, not stories, just fragments. He laughed in his sleep. He liked warm milk at night. He called the moon his friend. He called me Mama. And always at the bottom, "If you find this, say my name." Sometimes she left the notes in places only the wind could carry them. Sometimes in hollows of trees. Once she watched a squirrel take one, dragging it into its nest. She smiled. Let the memory go. Let it live in the world without her. Then came the boy. Not hers, another. From the village, no older than 5. He came to her door one morning, barefoot, holding a flower. Said nothing, just looked at her for a long while, then whispered, "I saw you in my dream." Her breath caught. "What did you see?" He smiled. "You were telling stories to a boy
with a rattle. She knelt before him. Her voice trembled. What was the boy's name? The boy frowned, thought hard. I don't know. He held up the flower, but he said to give you this. She took it, a white jasmine, still warm from his hand, still real. That night she dreamed again, but not of temples, not of monks, not of shadows. She dreamed of a tree, tall, alive, with no names carved into it, just leaves, and every leaf whispered, not in sorrow, in memory, in remembrance, in love. She stood beneath it and heard the voice of her son, not from above, not from beyond, from within. I still know who you are. When she woke, she wept, not with agony, but with something softer, something sad, but whole. Years passed. The village aged. Faces changed. Homes collapsed. Children grew. And Mai remained. Never older, never younger. The villagers began to speak of her in half-truths. She was the midwife once. She helped my sister when she miscarried. She walks at night, leaving flowers by the river. She doesn't speak, but she listens. And always, she's kind. They didn't know her name, but they felt it, like a hum in the bones, like warmth in the dark, like a memory too gentle to fully leave. One autumn, a scholar visited from the city. He was looking for ruins, old temples, ancient rituals. He stayed in the village for 3 nights, asking questions no one could answer. But an old woman pointed him to her. She knows stories, she said, even the ones no one else remembers. The scholar found her in the forest, sitting beside the Bodhi tree. He asked her, "Do you know anything about Wat Chut Nam?" She looked at him, smiled faintly. "What would you like to know?" "Some say it was a monastery. Others say it was a place of exile." "It was a door," she replied, "and some things should stay behind doors." He laughed nervously. "And you, how long have you lived here?" She looked away. "Long enough to remember, long enough to forget, long enough to know the difference." He thanked her, left, but not before asking, "What is your name?" She paused, felt the wind move through her hair, heard the leaves above her stir, and softly she said, "If you ever hear it, whisper it for me." Years later, that same scholar returned, this time with a child, his daughter. He searched the village for the woman, but no one knew her. No one had seen her in decades. They told stories instead, of a spirit who wandered the trees, of a woman who lit candles that never burned out, of notes left in the hollows of trees written in a language older than Thai. He found the Bodhi tree, sat beneath it, closed his eyes, and from the wind he thought he heard, "Mai." He whispered it back, and the forest sighed, as if something had been remembered, as if something had never truly left. Final image. In a drawer beneath the altar of an abandoned temple no one remembers, there is a letter. It is sealed with red thread, written in a soft, trembling hand, and it reads, "If I am ever spoken of again, let it be softly. If I am remembered, let it be with warmth. If I am forgotten, let the world be gentle. Let the wind carry me. Let someone, somewhere, whisper my name when I'm gone.